1 year later, to really look at all the legislative issues of importance to our region. I'd like to thank our sponsors at the Boulder Chamber, Google and WW Reynolds, for making this happen, and anybody that supports any of our chambers for all the work that we do and all the events that we bring to you as a coalition. I would like to go ahead and just give you a quick preview of what we will see today, and then describe who the Northwest Chamber Alliance is, and then we'll introduce our leadership. Today, we are here to discuss the key legislative issues that are our importance to our region. We will have Governor Polis providing comments. His schedule switched unexpectedly, but he is not able to be with us. He did send comments for our coalition. We have State Senators Steve Femberg and Faith Winter here today. They will be joined by Representative Matt Gray to talk about the key legislative priorities that have yet to be concluded here as the legislative session carries on and we're going into the final stretch. We also have Andy Carsian from CDOT who will comment on some of the transportation items that the legislators will discuss. And then a very good friend of our coalition in our region, Alex Burness from the Denver Post, who covers all the day in, day out happenings at the Capitol, will fill us in on everything else and give us the dirt, the politics, and all the challenges in front of the scenes, behind the scenes, and otherwise as to what is going on and what he expects to be done. And then all our other legislators, representatives, state senators, they'll be coming through as they get out of their committee assignments today to be able to answer your questions and talk about their priorities. So with that being said, welcome. Thank you for being here. I'd like to just give a little background on the Northwest Chamber Alliance. We were formed in 2016. We are 8 chambers in Boulder and Broomfield counties, representing collectively about 3,700 organizations. And that's a workforce of 380,000 people. The Northwest Chamber Alliance values the relationship we have with our state leaders, and we are advocates for sustaining a thriving economy and addressing quality of life and anything that touches the economic vitality of our region to really be able to continue to advocate for what our businesses need and need to prosper. We appreciate the engagement we get from our state leaders throughout the legislative session, and we really value their availability and the opportunity to bring our members here to an event like this today to be able to get your questions answered here on the priorities and engage yourselves. So with that being said, we have a team of leaders here representing the 8 chambers from Broomfield and Boulder counties, and I will have them introduce themselves in alphabetical order by chamber, and we will start with John Tair from Boulder.
Hi, I'm John Tair. I'm President and CEO of the Boulder Chamber. And the only thing I'll add in addition to what Andrea had said is the Northwest Chamber Alliance, we only operate through consensus of all our partner chambers. And we don't speak on a lot of issues, but when we do, I think that really means a lot in terms of the impact of all business, the entire business voice of Broomfield and Boulder counties coming together. So I love this group and I really love partnering with my colleagues.
Thank you everyone for being here. Really appreciate that. I'm Sam Taylor. I'm the President and CEO of the Broomfield Chamber.
Rachel.
Thank you. I'm Rachel Garcia, and I'm the chairperson of the Latino Chamber of Commerce of Boulder County. We also have our operations manager here, Ricardo Cabrera.
Next is Scott Beard.
Hi, I'm Scott Beard. I'm on the advisory board for the LGBTQ Chamber of Boulder County. We formed in 2019, and we are actually the newest member of the Northwest Chamber Alliance, having joined this spring, and very happy to be a part of this wonderful group.
TJ, I believe you're next.
Hi, TJ Sullivan with the Superior Chamber of Commerce. I'm the Executive Director. I'm pleased to see our Mayor Clint Folsom on the call, and also Nick Carruthers, our Board Treasurer. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Cook. I'm the CEO from the Longmont Chamber.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Shelley Angel, the Executive Director of the Louisville Chamber of Commerce.
And not able to be with us right now, but we would like to acknowledge their partnership is the Lafayette Chamber, their Executive Director, Vicki Trumbo, but we do have staff from the Lafayette Chamber and members of their Board of Directors. So thank you, everyone. I would like to begin by turning it over to my colleague, Lori Call, the Senior Policy Program Director at the Boulder Chamber, and she will be talking about the issues that the Northwest Chamber Alliance has focused on during this legislative session, and the ones that we are monitoring that have a significant impact to our region and are of interest. And she will also be joined by Sam Taylor and Scott Cook. Lori.
Thanks, Andrea. So at the Northwest Chamber Alliance, we often speak with one voice on behalf of the broader business community. We also act as individual chambers and sometimes as small groups. And so it really depends on the issue, but we do try to, as a collective, monitor various business issues facing our state. We find that pulling together meetings like this, where we have many of our chambers represented and allowing our members to hear from leaders throughout the state, has been a really effective way of leveraging this group. And we've hosted events on healthcare, family leave, as well as a county commissioner's candidate event to help bring understanding of all of the issues to our broader membership. Earlier in the session, we also hosted an event on transportation and had the opportunity to speak with state legislators on our priorities, many of which were reflected in the current package that you'll hear about in more detail a little bit later. A couple of bills that we've tracked this session include Senate Bill 62, which addresses jail management and safety issues for our employers, employees, and customers. And we've also tracked House Bill 1232, which addresses health insurance and considers various cost drivers for the healthcare system. We've also come together to address transportation legislation this year as well as in years past. And my colleague, Sam Taylor, CEO of the Broomfield Chamber, will talk more about that now. Sam?
It helps if I get myself unmuted to begin with. Thanks, Lori. As Lori mentioned, I'm Sam Taylor with the Broomfield Chamber. And as John Taylor mentioned right at the beginning, there are few issues we actually take a stand on as a group because we are 8 chambers and we work collaboratively. So if there's something that just impacts one chamber, we tend not to support it as a group. But one of the areas that's a major area of collaboration is transportation. And you've seen that through some of the positions we've taken. We work together on the issue to bring the awareness and the dollars to the regional transportation systems, and by engaging with various organizations like our TMOs, Commuting Solutions and Smart Commute, engaging with our local, state, and federal officials, which we do frequently, and again today, thank you for being here. And there are major arterials that go through our areas. Something like 36, Highway 119, I-25 and Highway 7 all go through multiple jurisdictions in our area of our 8 chambers. And pretty much all of them need additional funding. So no surprise to anybody. Northwest Chamber Alliance has been an active partner in all these projects, especially the Highway 7 corridor development plan. As many of you know, this ambitious plan stretches from Boulder to Brighton. And currently the price tag is over $350 million. In the next 20 years, is estimated another 38,000 jobs will come to that corridor, with probably about 55,000 new residents driving on it. And as you heard before, we work on a collaboration, and not every one of these highways impacts everyone. For example, as a regional coalition, a key corridor we supported is the State Highway 119, and that connects Boulder to Longmont. Scott from Longmont, I mean, what would you like to add about Longmont's legislative priorities?
Sure, thanks, Sam. And I would agree with everything that you have said and that Lori has said, and working together in a collaborative fashion. And we've taken positions and helped our fellow communities too on things like transportation that don't directly impact Longmont, but do much impact us as a region. So thank you for that. I'll also mention too that one bill that we're watching here at the Longmont Chamber that we've actually opposed, but we haven't done so as a region, is Senate Bill 176. I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit about that today with our legislators. We have a few concerns at the Longmont Chamber on the breadth of this bill as it deals with workers' rights, including contractors and volunteers. Of course, chambers themselves use a lot of volunteers, so we have some concerns there. We have a little bit of concern about the broadness of the definition of a hostile work environment, and also just the undefined parameters for employers as well. So we do, as the other speakers have said, we work together on a lot of issues, but then we also bring issues that are important to each one of our chambers and see if there can't be some collaboration on things that are important to each one of us. So with that, I'll hand it back to Lori, I believe.
I think we're headed back to Andre. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Lori. One office that we are continually engaging with at the Northwest Chamber Alliance is with our governor's office. And if you're still in the spotlight mode of the view of your Zoom, you can look in the upper right-hand corner and change it back to the gallery mode. You have to do that manually. But the engagement with Governor Polis's office is something that we are continually doing through the legislative session throughout the year. As our economy has taken a downturn, we're coordinating with the office of OEDIT and Betsy Markey when she was there to try and navigate through the pandemic, the impacts to our businesses. Today, Governor Polis wanted to be here to talk about the current legislation. However, he couldn't, and he provided us with video comments. And during his video comments, you actually find out why he can't be here. So with that being said, my colleague Tyler will play the video from Governor Polis that he sent today.
I want to thank the Northwest Chamber Alliance, the Boulder and Broomfield counties, and hardworking leaders across the state for joining us today. I was planning to be with you in person, but today's my birthday, so I am at the Rockies game as we speak. And I wanted to record a special message for you ahead of time. We've been through a lot this year, not just the global pandemic, but of course in Boulder, the King Soopers shooting. I had to attend too many funerals, and that's one of the hardest things you do as governor. I went to 6 of the funerals from victims of that shooting, each one unique, each one a treasured member of our community. Then we celebrate their lives, and we express our condolences to their families. And while healing takes some time, it really takes all of us working together to recover. And I want to thank you for doing this work with me for the health, resilience, healing of the community. I'm happy to help however I can. I wanted to bring up one of the more exciting opportunities that's important for the prosperity of Colorado, the quality of life in Colorado this session, and that's a transportation package. This has been something that has been elusive for our state for decades to do. So many failed attempts over the years, and we know the cracks in our system and on our roads have been festering. Our roads are overdue for repair, clogged with traffic, crumbling infrastructure. I think it was rated 47th out of 50 states in a national study. And if we don't act, it'll continue to get worse. The good news is that we have the opportunity to act with a strong bipartisan proposal. I joined Boulder's own Majority Leader Steve Fenberg, Speaker Alec Arnett, Senator Faith Winter, Representative Matt Gray, with bipartisan mayors and advocates from the environmental community and the business community. to really launch an important comprehensive transportation proposal that will modernize the way we fund our roads and help prepare for a cleaner, greener future. And I think if there's one thing that we can get done that will help the business community in a very substantial way, it would be solving the decades of inaction on infrastructure here in Colorado. As part of that, we also want to continue to work on Front Range Rail and exclusively create a district for that purpose, which is an important part of the commuting solution, as well as meeting our air quality goals. That's a separate bill as well. We have an ambitious roadmap for reducing emissions and for climate change, a number of bills in that area that I hope get to my desk to continue Colorado's leadership role in clean air and leading on climate change. And we also have a unique opportunity for a state stimulus. And our state legislature and I are working on $700 million in state stimulus, one-time investments, everything from providing tax relief to restaurants to assistance to those who have been hit hardest by the pandemic. Clearly, there's a lot of room for improvement. It's not good enough to build back exactly as we were before the pandemic. We want to build back more fairly, more equitably, and have an even higher and more sustainable quality of life. This pandemic has shaken all of us. And thank goodness it's only once in a century. Let's hope there's not another one for another century. But our hope for a healthier Colorado is finally being realized. And I think the challenges and the appreciation for our health that we all have is a big part of the catalyst for how we can build back even better than before. And I want to encourage all of you to share Colorado's workplace vaccination program. We're ready to show up on site with and do vaccinations anytime. I've been to employers large and small, and you can sign up at workvaccinations.com, workvaccinations.com. And we can go right to your site to do a clinic. I'm optimistic that we will continue to work to relieve the pain felt over the last year and to power the Colorado comeback for our economy, for our quality of life, for our health. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your partnership. I hope everyone stays safe, and I look forward to joining you in person next time when it's not my birthday and I'm not at a Rockies game. See you soon.
Thank you, Governor Polis. We value the partnership we have with the governor's office, the relationship the Northwest Chamber Alliance has with the governor, and gratefully he lives in our region, and we have had a long time relationship with him from his days in Congress. He couldn't be here, but sends his thoughts on the legislative priorities and the economic recovery work that we can do together, and we will continue in those efforts and through that partnership. Here today to talk about some of those priorities as well are our state legislators. We have, I don't know if Senator Fenberg is here yet, but thankfully we have Representative Gray and Senator Winter here. We had an event in March to talk about the transportation legislation where we discussed the issues with them. We sent a letter to our legislators before it was issued, and now we have legislation that is out there. So they are here to tell us what to expect, some of the opportunities or challenges that they're currently dealing with in order to get some progress on actually delivering this as a solution for our state. So now, Senator Fenberg, I do not see you. I'm going to turn it over to Representative Gray and Senator Winter. And if Senator Fenberg, you are here, feel free to jump in as well. But Tyler, if you could spotlight Representative Gray and Senator Winter, we'll hear from them. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We are very excited to be with you all today and really appreciate all the feedback and input that you've given us to get this far. The transportation bill, which is Senate Bill 260, has passed out of the Finance Committee and the Appropriations Committee this morning and will be on the floor later this week in the Senate. And the hearing was about 8.5 hours long with a lot of feedback. I'm sure some of you probably participated as well, so thank you. And we're really excited about the package that we're bringing together, but I'll let Representative Gray talk about how we're raising the money, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to spend the money and how we are looking at this as a way to future-proof our transportation system.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a situation where we've got, and I know that everybody on this call understands this as well. We've got citizens and business owners and folks who are telling us, go fix transportation. But what we've tried a bunch of times is sending sort of more one size fits all packages to the voters to say, hey, please approve this thing and then we'll be done. And they're across the ideological spectrum, right? So there's Proposition 109 that said, hey, just borrow money and figure out how you're going to pay for it from other priorities. And if you have to cut education or healthcare, okay. And voters said no. On the other side, we had a group of chambers and more progressive groups who said, let's go get a sales tax that was dedicated to fund transportation. And there's a lot of work that went into that, and voters said no. And we also had Proposition CC a couple years later, which would have allowed us to keep Tabor revenue over the cap and invest a third of that in transportation, and voters said no. And so the message we've taken is, you know, when voters have said, look, we want you to solve this problem, but no matter where you are on the ideological spectrum, the one size fits all solution is not what we want. Well, we've gone in and has designed nothing close to that and designed a very custom fit system for funding transportation in the future based not on what your sales tax is, what your gas tax is, you know, what your Tabor cap is, but actually based on how people use roads. And we've actually had a really good roads and all other forms of transit, I should say. We've had a really good response because when you ask everybody who is actively using transportation to pay in a little bit more, overwhelmingly their answer is yes. They're like, yes, we are willing to pay in more because we know it's good for our business to have better infrastructure. We know it's better for our families to have good infrastructure. We know it's better for workforce development to have good infrastructure. So I won't take you through all of this right now. We can send you the bill and we can send you the slide deck, but we are basically asking a little bit more from everybody, from Uber and Lyft to DoorDash to Grubhub to folks who pay for gasoline to folks who own electric vehicles to companies who use diesel vehicles. We're asking for a little bit more from everybody because we're all the ones who need to get around and to really make a once in a generation investment in mobility in this state. And as Senator Winter mentioned, we're trying to future-proof this. Like for those who are not nerds about this stuff, you know, the gas tax in Colorado was last changed in 1992. So we're coming up on 30 years of the same policy, and we're moving away from gasoline quickly, and inflation is what inflation does. So it's a set number of cents from 1992, and we've known that was the problem for decades. We've just never gotten to the solution, and we think we found it. So I will then give it to Senator Winter to talk about how we plan on spending that money if and when we get a chance to receive it.
Yep. So why are we doing this? We want to get people out of traffic and reduce their commute times. We also want to address our climate goals and clean our air. And we want to make sure that our roads and bridges are safe. And so the first major investment is a down payment to CDOT's 10-year plan, which is really focused on relieving congestion in the worst places and making sure our roads and bridges are safe. And then we also are funding this through the Highway Users Trust Fund, the HUTF. We're not changing that model. And so that is 60% to CDOT, and then it is 18% to cities and 22% to counties, which we've maintained in this. But we are also creating some new enterprises. So there's 4 new enterprises we're creating. 3 are around electrification. One is based in the governor's energy office, one is based at CDPHE, and one is based at CDOT. Each of these enterprises have different uses, but they're all geared to make sure that we are electrifying our fleet all across Colorado. So one is making sure that there's enough charging stations, especially at places like apartment buildings and road stops and other things like that, to make sure that people have the consumer confidence to buy an electric vehicle and access to the charging they need to buy an electric vehicle. The other is a fleet enterprise to make sure that we are transferring fleets at cities and counties and businesses over to electric vehicles. And then the final one is a public transit electrification. So more buses, including electric school buses. And then the final enterprise we're creating is an enterprise for the non-attainment area. So this is an area, it's our area, right? Mostly urban, suburban areas that are out of attainment for air quality. And what projects can we do and invest in as local communities in order to clean our air and meet our climate goals? And so there's an enterprise for that as well. And then we are doing a $2.5 million investment into Front Range Rail. Now, that's certainly not enough to build Front Range Rail, but it is enough to do the next big steps of doing the studies. And you all have been very transformative in making sure that when we talk about Front Range Rail, we are also talking about the route that would complete the Northwest Rail, which is incredibly important to our area. And so we've been working with the Front Range Rail Commission, with RTD, with all of you and your communities. And we believe that this $2.5 million contribution from the state will help make us more attractive for the federal money that we know is coming to help bolster infrastructure. And so that's why we're doing this and how we're going to be spending the money. And so both how we're raising money and really looking at the people using the roads, investing in the roads, how we're spending the money is also looking towards the future of how we're traveling around. Oh, and I almost forgot the multimodal option fund. It's a historic investment in multimodal, $440 million over the next 11 years.
And I did forget the one part I always forget when it comes to revenue, which is historic commitment of state general fund as well into what we're doing here, not just in the sort of short-term, medium-term, and long-term, but in our state level stimulus funds. We slashed the budget a lot when we thought that the economic collapse from COVID could be worse than it was. I know that everybody who's on this call represents businesses who are recovering, but we're doing better than we budgeted for our worst fears. Right? And so we're investing $200 million of state general fund money now into getting this infrastructure back, but we're also committing about $100 million a year into the future out of the general fund. Because as we ask other folks to invest, we think that the state should do the same. So that money is in there as well. And that's the part of the presentation I always forget, but it is there. We have, it's basically and I could get the numbers wrong. It's basically $3.3 billion in fee revenue over the next 11 years and about 1.4 in general fund money.
All right, thank you for that overview, Representative Gray and Senator Winter. We open it up to all our chamber leaders, our members that are here today. We got the message from Senator Fenberg's office that he is on his way. I do not see him here yet. And we also have CDOT's state legislative liaison will be joining us. However, given all the activity at the Capitol, we're getting messages that they're still held up in committee meetings and hearings. However, does anybody here? Oh, here's Senator Fenberg right now entering the meeting. Hold those questions. All right, Senator Fenberg, I believe you're in the meeting. There you are. Tyler, go ahead, put the spotlight on our newest arrival, Senator Steve Fenberg. Senator Fenberg, Representatives Gray and Senator Winter just described the bill, the status, where it is now. From your perspective, what are the remaining hurdles to get over? How close are we to getting this solution? And how do you see it really delivering those benefits specifically to our region?
Well, I'll trust that Matt and Faith said some smart things.
They did.
I echo everything they said. In terms of additional hurdles, the good news is that the only hurdles left are the Senate and the House, and then the governor's signature. And that might seem like I'm trying to be funny, but honestly, I actually think it's going to be hard, but it's the easiest part of this. The hardest part was to get all of the disparate interests and folks to come to an agreement on not something that they think is the best case scenario or ideal or perfect, but is something that they think is meaningful, gets them a lot of what they've been wanting for decades, and getting them to live with the other things that other people have been wanting for a long time that sometimes can be counter to their interests. So we've done a lot of work. Faith and Matt have been doing this since they were like 6 years old, and it is finally coming to fruition. And so from that perspective, all we have left is the Senate and the House. And that means that this deal is in some ways in the home stretch. We got out of the Appropriations Committee this morning in the Senate. We're headed to the floor maybe Friday, we're thinking, but it'll be in the coming days, and then off to the House. And I think there's still going to be a lot of debate on the floors of both chambers. And we've gotten this bill, I think, to a place where not everybody loves it, but most people are, and most interest groups and different chambers and organizations and associations that have been involved in this for years really, really, really want to see this get across the finish line because of all the benefits that are in it. It moves the ball forward in such a significant way when it comes to transit, when it comes to rural roads, when it comes to very specific projects that we know we just need to invest in for our state's economy. Moves the ball forward in a significant way on electrification. It adds a climate and environmental justice lens to a lot of the big projects that in the past it was a bit of an afterthought on. So I think this has something for everyone. There's no question that every person and every individual in the coalition to this point still wants more, and they'll probably make the case. And we'll see where the chips land, but I'm excited about the proposal that is moving right now. I don't think it's going to change significantly, but just around the edges. And I think it'll be a huge victory for Colorado, especially our communities, because of the massive benefit and the sort of structural changes that are going to happen as a result of this bill. A lot of people can say there's not enough EV money in there. There's not enough focus on climate. There's not enough of this or that. But in the end, I do think overall, it's a bit of a paradigm shift compared to how we talked about transportation 5-10 years ago. So I think it's significant, meaningful, not the end of the conversation on transportation, but I think the beginning of sort of this iteration of how we talk about transportation from here on out. And I think that's going to be the biggest legacy of this policy. So happy to answer questions or go into specific areas, but I'll leave it there and see where folks want to go.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Fenberg. And I just remind all viewers, once we spotlight a speaker, you could just go to the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom and hit the gallery view to go back to the whole group. And I look to the group now. If there are any questions or comments that you all have for our legislators that just spoke. And you can indicate so by the raise hand function in the Zoom, which is under your reactions button. All right, I see the hand up of John Tair. John?
Well, I'll just to get the ball rolling, I actually have 3 questions, and so choose them which ones you want to answer. But first of all, wondering what confidence you have that this bill will not be challenged and undermined by a Tabor lawsuit, just in terms of the enterprise issues, the fees. Second, I am wondering what confidence you can give us in this region that this legislation, coupled with also the Front Range Rail District, that will give greater probability that we will see a rail in the future here in our region. And then finally, I just, we've talked about transportation for years in terms of a need in our state. And I just have no sense of what this does, percentage-wise, when we think about the amount of resources that are going into transportation through this significant legislation. If you can give us some perspective on that. So those 3 areas.
Sure, I'll do the first 2 and then see where folks want to land on the other one. On the Tabor question, that's what I do for a living when I'm not doing this. And it's not really a legal question that's that close. We've worked very closely with the AG's office and also outside counsel firms on making sure that the fees that are imposed do adhere to the benefit of the folks who are paying them. And that's what a fee needs to be. The thing about a tax, right? If you have a tax, you pay your income taxes, right? And some of that goes to prisons. Well, if you don't deal with the justice system that year, you didn't get any benefit from that, but we just got to have general government going. That's not the way any of this is set up. It gives people confidence in a program like this, because the money we collect by charging fees against people who use the transportation system have to go back into the transportation system. They can't be sent to schools. They can't be sent to prisons. They have to stay here. And so we've done a ton of work on the legal analysis. We may get sued. I mean, you know, when we're the state, we could get sued on any given day. But we've actually pared back this plan on the enterprise side significantly to make sure that we could really make this solid argument that anything that was going into an enterprise is going to benefit the people who pay into that enterprise. And a ton of the revenues aren't in there. You know, we're sending $2 billion into the HUTF, which is not an enterprise, but it is also a source of revenue that local governments are used to and they expect and they know how to spend. So we're doing that as well. And Front Range Rail. So the Front Range Rail, there's a separate bill on Front Range Rail also that I am running with the Senate President and the House Majority Leader and Senator Zenzinger. In addition to the money that we have set forth in this bill, and there's a lot of different moving pieces going on, but it goes back to what Senator Winder said at the beginning, which is all of the things we're doing right now is to make us a very attractive target for federal money, because we can't afford this on our own. Like, we've got about $2.5 million, I believe, in this bill. That's nowhere close to enough money to build Front Range Rail, but it is enough to do the studies we need to do to make ourselves really attractive. And the existing Front Range Rail Commission itself took a vote. It was probably 2 weeks ago and feels like 4 years ago because it's pandemic times, but they have voted to officially endorse the Northwest Rail route, which again is very similar to what RTD planned on for Northwest Rail, not because of RTD, but just because that's where the existing right-of-way is for the existing rail lines. So the existing commission as it is now, and the separate bill that we have would change it and bring more folks from up in the north area to be on the commission, but they've already officially endorsed that as a route. So does that guarantee we're going to have a train? No, it doesn't. But we also know we're going into a window where there is potentially significant, like, historical federal stimulus coming also. And if we can get that money invested into Front Range Rail, including the Northwest route, we are very excited about doing that. And I don't remember what the third question is, but Steve or Faith should answer.
Just real quick on the Northwest Rail and all of that. We also, that bill was on the floor this morning. We added, I think, 4 or 5 amendments, almost all of which were about making sure that that a lot of our constituents have representation on that future board, and that there is a lot of serious thought taken towards factors that we think benefit the smartest path, which is Northwest Rail as the route. So worked a whole lot with Boulder County and other local governments in the region, and other folks to make sure that got in there, and I'm excited that it did. The third question, I think, was just like, how much of a dent are we putting into the needs, I think is sort of what your question was, John, and it's significant. I mean, there's no question this is one of the largest investments in transportation infrastructure we've ever done as a state. A lot of it is different from the types of investments we've done in the past, because the way we use transportation and the way we want transportation to work in the future is different than the past as well. So the overall package of this bill over an 11-year horizon is $5.2 or $5.3 billion. But you know, the money doesn't sunset. It lives on and continues to grow. And I think the biggest victory here is that we're creating a long-term sustainable funding solution, and not just simply spending one-time money that once those projects are done, we have to have the same fight and discussion all over again. We will have the discussion on after year 11, we'll have it before that, but we'll have a discussion on what the next 10 years looks like in terms of what we prioritize. But the funding that we are creating from this bill will continue and will be there to fund those projects when a different version of all of us have that conversation in several years from now. So I think that's the biggest takeaway, is the long-term nature of the funding source. But even in the short term, it is very significant. We are going to make a very big dent in the 10-year plan, as well as big investments that are not in the 10-year plan because they're outside of it, like the climate and the EV and the multimodal investments. Those are significant and probably put us on the map to be the largest investments in electrification infrastructure, at least, than maybe any other state in the country. So it's a lot to be proud of. I think it'll pay off and be good all around for our state's growth and for our economy. The other thing, what else was I going? The other thing I was going to say is a lot of what's in this bill, we're future proofing, is what we keep saying, and that's the revenue sources and making sure the right users are paying for the right types of usage of the roads. But we also built in sort of moments where we force the state to take a step back, take a deep breath, and make sure we're still on track. Meaning, we're going to do a gut check on the EV fee, see if it's too high, too low, if it's at parity, if it's not. We're going to take a gut check at year 5 on different aspects like that around the fees. Probably most significantly and most relevant in the short term is we're also going to require the state to look at whatever comes from Congress, from the federal infrastructure package that may come, and make sure we're realigning our priorities in the way we're raising money and spending money, so that it leverages with that rather than being redundant and maybe not strategic. So we're sort of a little bit ahead of the curve compared to Congress, which shouldn't be a surprise. But we built in sort of a moment where we will make sure we take all of that into account and adjust accordingly to make sure every dollar is being used effectively.
All right, looks like you got an enthusiastic reaction from John Taylor. I do see a question from Sam Taylor, CEO, Broomfield Chamber.
Thanks, Andrea. There's a lot of various issues and a lot of bills that affect employers and employees in this area, but I'm going to stick to transportation, since we have 3 of the sponsors of SB 260 here, which, thank you for being here. I really appreciate that. Senator Fenberg, you mentioned that this does make a huge dent in the CDOT 10-year plan, and that is one of the areas that the Northwest Chamber Alliance did come to consensus, and every one of us signed a letter of support of that. Earlier this year or last year, I'm trying to remember exactly when it was, COVID days, they kind of blend. So it is, but to this specific bill, Senator Fenberg, as you mentioned, it's not perfect. It's got something for everyone. Not everybody loves it. I've noticed quite often, if it's got something for everybody to like, that means it's got something for everybody to hate. When you're looking at this, and you mentioned some of the other things, or Representative Gray mentioned it, like CC that came up, or 109, which got beat. Are you satisfied that this is the best negotiated package you've come up with at this time, and pulled the various constituents and pieces together?
I think so. I mean, honestly, this is if not months in the making, it was years in the making. A lot of folks have signed off on the current version of the bill that in other conversations have very disparate interests. A lot of times I think, they say that's if everybody is a little unhappy with something, you probably got a pretty good deal. And I think that probably accounts for a lot. I mean, the hearing that we had on this that Faith and I had the other day in the Finance Committee was kind of bizarre, because you'd have 3 people up there to testify. One person thinks the electric vehicle fees are way too low. The other person wants, more investments in rural roads, and the other person thinks the EV fees are too high. And then the other, the next person probably thinks, there's not enough for metro area. So it's like everybody wants a little bit more. And I think this is a good package. It is a good compromise because we had all of that input over the last like literally a year. And none of that was in a vacuum. It was all taken into account. There was tons of back and forth negotiations to get us to where we are. Is it perfect? No, but I actually think on transportation, there's no such thing as perfect because there are so many opposing interests, just because of regions and diversity and how people use the roads, and the fact that some people are fine paying a little more and other people want to pay a little less, and that's just how it goes. And I'm pretty proud of the fact that the major players all support the bill. They may want something a little different or a little bit changed, but as a whole, they support it. And I think that's a huge achievement that we've been able to do collectively, not just the sponsors, but the advocates and different folks who've been involved along the way. What I will say about, you referenced some of the ballot measures. The reason why I think this is going to work is because it has what a ballot measure can't have. A ballot measure generally is funded by one interested, party, or at least a coalition of shared interests. And so they don't have that nuanced negotiation over the course of 12 months because it's against their interest to do so. They don't care what the opposing side wants in their policy because they're the ones paying for it to get it on the ballot to hopefully pass. This bill is 200 pages, and we were able to sort of have that nuanced conversation with so many different interests. I think that's actually why it is the right proposal, why it is the right negotiated package, because of all that work that could go into this that really just is not something that can go into a ballot measure proposal.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, the floor is open to anyone who would like to pose a question from any of the chambers, any of our members and attendees here today. If you have a question, please indicate so by the raise hand function, which could be found in your Zoom under the reactions button. Not seeing any questions at the moment. Senator Fenberg, Senator Winter, Representative Gray, I'll ask one that any of you can answer. And
it's like Scott might have, Scott Cook.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, Andrea, sorry, I think I'm having a little difficulty here with my reactions. I don't know, I might have raised my hand and then put it back down, but I do have a comment actually instead of a question. Being from Longmont, I'm very interested in the conversation on Northwest Rail, of course. Our chamber has just started looking at this bill, and we haven't taken a position or anything like that. But anything else that you want to add about that, I will be happy to take that back to our policy committee, because I think that will be of a lot of interest. Our policy members just last week had a lot of questions about the transportation bill, and we're asking you about it. And I think if we had some more information on the Northwest Rail and how it might be impacted, that would be pretty cool for us in Longmont. Love to hear if it would move up the timeline at all. That'd be one question we would have, because I'm constantly asked that by members here in Longmont.
Sure. So I think we are at a once in a lifetime opportunity to make this a reality and move up the timeline. And the reason for that is we have an administration that, both based on values and based on the need of recovering from the pandemic, is poised to invest billions of dollars in infrastructure, including rail. And because we are organized along the corridor, frankly, because a lot of the work of the chambers along the corridor and local governments to say, we have come together, we believe in the Northwest Rail, we want the Northwest Rail to happen. And so we're already organized. Local communities have been saving money to contribute to a Northwest Rail project. RTD has their savings that they've had to complete Northwest Rail. The fact that RTD and Front Range Rail Authority are going to be entering into an MOU, and that the Front Range Rail Authority will have more guardrails and more structure after we pass that bill, and that the Front Range Rail Authority passed that they want the alignment of Front Range Rail to be along the Northwest Rail. It makes us very attractive. So we've talked with our federal delegation, we've talked with lobbyists for Amtrak. Amtrak released a map that wasn't super detailed, but showed the Northwest Rail being complete as part of what they want to do nationally. And so what I think we need to do is come together, all the chambers from the area, the local governments, the state government, RTD, Front Range Rail, meet with our federal delegation, talk about why we are more organized, more prepared, have resources at the table to attract that federal money. And I think we, because we have been organizing around this for over a decade, are poised to be one of the model projects that could come out of the infrastructure funding.
Thank you, Senator Winter. Amy Aschenbrenner, saw your hand up, and it looks like Scott Cook gave that response a thumbs up, so good answer. Amy.
It is absolutely, we're looking very forward to someday in the future getting that rail. My question really is 2 points, and it revolves around the entire conversation. One, does this bill address how we get the, to say it correctly, the lower income, the encouragement to go to the electric vehicles? Are there going to be an incentive? Because statistically, it will show you that the lower income tend to purchase the older vehicles because that's what they can afford. So how are we going to reach that population, which is a larger population than what we all want to think it is, in order to incentivize them to go to electric? The second part of my question is, has there been conversation about how all of this is going to work, specifically Boulder County, and even if we stretch into Weld and Larimer? We've got a lot of rural people who work in the larger municipalities. So even if it's Boulder, Longmont, Lafayette, Louisville, but they're driving in from out in the rural communities. So when we talk about rail, because a lot of them work in Denver, right? Are we talking about substations to where they're going to be able to drive to a park and ride, for example, to be able to catch a bus that's going to take them to the rail? And the other part of that question is the electric cars. Are we looking at putting in the stations out in those rural communities for them to recharge their cars to finish their commute? So I just want to make sure that the rural people are not being left off of this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. So to both those questions, first I'll start with the low income folks. We're going to have a pilot project for making sure low income folks can afford electric vehicles, and you see the market switching to that right now, right? So before it was higher end cars and Tesla, etc. But now we see GM switching over their entire fleet in the next decade to electric vehicles, including their lower priced cars. We're also going to do a pilot program to have the one-time fees for electric vehicles be paid throughout the year versus a one-time fee, because we know when you're on a low income and a fixed budget, paying something once a year versus a couple pennies at the gas pump every 2 weeks makes a difference in how you budget and how you make decisions. And then on top of that, we know that a lot of lower income people live in places that are multifamily housing, so apartment complexes and condos and duplexes, etc. And you might not have the access to charging. And so one of the enterprises is to make sure that we are building charging infrastructure with where everyone lives so that you feel like you have access to charging. When we're talking about rural folks and having access to multimodal, so first of all, Colorado has more rural public transit any other state in the country. And it's something that we should be really proud of and continue. And so we have a lot of rural multimodal transit to build off of. And we're really flexible in what multimodal is. So it's not just buses, it's not just trains. So for example, one rural town used it to build a walkway from where all the children lived to where the school was over the state highway. And so when we talk about parking garages, when we talk about transportation hubs, when we talk about, so for example, we've been working with the I-70 Coalition and having small vans from city to city that ties into their rural transit agencies. That is some of the things that the multimodal option fund can be used for. So it's very flexible and will be for rural areas and not just urban and suburban.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that question, Amy. Mark, did you have one?
This is Braden. Yeah.
Braden, I'm sorry.
Might have been. Yeah, no problem. That happens every day. I blame my parents for giving me 2 first names. So to me, like, this bill sounds a little bit like giving a little bit to a lot of places. And in my world anyways, when you try to make everybody happy, you make nobody happy. So what's the risk that, you know, what the result is you band-aid a lot of problems, but don't actually fix any of them? That's my question.
I mean, what I would say is when it comes to infrastructure, it's project by project. It's not like boiling the ocean is what we've tried and we've never successfully boiled it. But we're talking about over $2 billion into the HCTF, which includes a bunch of locally dedicated money and then a bunch of new dedicated money to help electrify our systems and attain air quality that's actually where the federal government wants us to be. So, you know, the thing about infrastructure funding is that, you know, you can try to bite off everything at once. We're not doing that, but we also, I mean, what the overall dollar number that we need is depends on who you ask. You know, we've been using the number $9 billion for years now, but there's some people who think we need less and there's some people who think we need more. We're getting $5 billion if we pass this bill as it is right now. And there's no argument that $5 billion is not a massive bite out of the problem we have on infrastructure. It's not the whole thing. I'm saying that it is, but it also could get paired with some additional federal money coming down there, and we could get pretty close to finally securing funding for at least the next decade of what we think we need to do here. And it's been 30 years since we could say that with any degree of confidence. You know, like Senate Bill 1 from a few years ago was very important. Senate Bill 267 was very important, but none of those were even close to what we're talking about here now. So the answer is no, we don't think this bill is going to, is perfect. We're just not going to make perfect the enemy of the good. And it is like, as the old saying goes, 5 billion here, 5 billion there, eventually you're talking about real money. And I'm pretty confident that we can make some real positive change with that investment.
Thanks.
Excellent. One last perspective we have here, and we have Andy Carcian from CDOT. He's the state legislative liaison. So Matt Gray is saying, cut him off. Don't let him speak.
Yeah, mute that guy. We don't. I don't like people whose beard is better than my beard, and so I don't know what to say about that.
The DOT will have to face implementing all these new dollars they get if this is to pass. Andy, quick thoughts on what does CDOT think about this? What can we expect in our region? And how are you going to pull all this off if you get this new funding?
Yeah, thank you very much, and really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you all. I'm sorry I'm late. It's been one of those days. Just echoing everything that Senator Winter and Representative Gray had said, CDOT's extremely excited about the bill. You know, a gentleman just mentioned a Band-Aid approach, and I think I would echo again what Representative Gray said, that this actually creates stable funding streams for transportation, which is something we have not had and we have been advocating for many, many years. And I would argue that a Band-Aid approach is a general fund transfer while the general fund transfers and the COPs have been beneficial and helpful in the past, obviously, when it comes down to would we take $1 of general fund transfer versus $1 of stable, consistent funding throughout the years, we're going to take that general, or we're going to take general fund. We're going to take that stable funding, absolutely. And so that's one of the things we're excited about this. Additionally, this helps create a holistic view of transportation in the state, something that we haven't had. We've only focused on roads and bridges or multimodal or X, Y, or Z. This takes into account the impacts of transportation on greenhouse gas and the environment. It establishes higher levels of transparency and accountability for enterprises, as well as CDOT and CEO and CDPH&E, as they use these funds from the fees that are developed. There's a lot of good, exciting stuff for everybody in the bill. As far as how it impacts the region for all of you, all of the obvious ones that I'm sure you've already talked about, right? We're got some continual seed money going in for the Front Range Rail to help them continue their environmental planning towards their alternative preference, their preferred preference for the rail line for Front Range Passenger Rail, which is extremely exciting. It's going to increase the amount of multimodal funding on a consistent basis, not just one-time transfers that we've had in the past. Those multimodal funds, the vast majority are going to be coming to the locals. The non-attainment fund is going to be a direct impact for the region as well, in helping mitigate efforts to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the enterprises for electrification of fleets and the incentivization of electric vehicles, all going to be positive impacts for the region.
Thank you, Andy. We really appreciate your perspective. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate everything you're doing to just advocate for a solution, and then hopefully for the implementation of a lot of these projects that we can see coming down the road. With that, we want to thank Senator Winter, Representative Gray for being here. Is there anything you'd like to say before you leave and we go to the next speakers today while you're here?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this isn't our first meeting. It probably won't be the last, but keep following the bill and let us know if you have feedback. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Winter and Representative Gray, and thank you for meeting with the Northwest Chamber Alliance today. Thank you for everything you're doing for our region. Our appreciation is definitely something that we'd like to convey to you.
Thank you.
So, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying thank you. Have a great day, afternoon.
Thank you. So someone else who is here today with us, who is not an elected official, but watches them very closely and has heard everything they've said to us so far, is Alexander Burness. Alex Burness was with the Boulder Daily Camera for a number of years, covering our city council and keeping a close eye on them and engaging with our chamber and providing that information to our region. Today, Alex is with the Denver Post. Alex is covering the legislative issues. He sees what's going on day in, day out. And we asked him to come here and give us his perspective on the legislative session, what's occurred so far, and maybe some of those other bills that they didn't hit on. Alex, what are the most important things to our businesses we should know about? And what are some other observations that you've had? And after you speak, we have room for questions for Alex if you really want to find out what's going on down there. So Alex, we'll put the spotlight on you.
Cool, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'll say a few words on what I'm seeing at the Capitol, but I'll mostly leave time for your guys' questions because I mean there's an unlimited number of interesting bills. I've been listening in to your session, and obviously there's keen interest in this virtual room and the transportation bill. One of the cool things about working at a paper the size of the Post is that we have subject matter experts. So my colleague John Murray has really owned our coverage of that transportation bill, and I will apologize to you guys up front because many of your nitty-gritty questions that you may have are not things that I've been following that closely on transportation, but I can speak on the politics of it, among other things. one of the things I'm always conscious of covering the legislature is that everything that happens in public view is very carefully choreographed. And so to find the interesting things, you have to dig a little bit deeper. And so the press conferences or the fact that a committee voted 6-5 or whatever it was, almost always that stuff, there's very little mystery to what's going to happen. And I would say, to anybody who is wondering what's going to happen with that transportation bill, the fact that the coalition they put together is so vast and that they've put so much work into getting everybody on the same page ahead of that announcement the other day is an indicator that the bill is definitely going to pass. I heard Fenberg say earlier something to the effect of, he doesn't expect big changes, maybe stuff around the margins. I'm sure that's true. A bill of that size is going to be amended one way or another, I would guess, maybe several ways. But there's no way that they'd put in that much work and the governor would put himself, throw his weight behind it for it not to pass. So that's happening. I think every session I'm like, ask myself like, okay, what's the story of the session? And I think this one's a little bit harder to pin down. It kind of depends what you're interested in. I think as an overall theme, we're in year 3 of full Democratic control. And in the first year, in the second year as well, but it was interrupted by COVID. So kind of an aberration. But anyway, the floodgates opened and all these long-standing priorities got addressed, at least in part, with transportation actually being a glaring example of one that was left over. But they knocked off a lot of their big agenda items. They did the oil and gas bill 181. They passed a bill to let state employees, collectively bargain. The red flag bill abolishing the death penalty. It felt like there were a lot of really big ticket things. I just named 4 of them, but I could probably think of 15 or 20 more from the last 2 years. And I think what you're seeing now is the Democrats settling into a slightly calmer period. It might not feel like it all the time, but I think this has been a relatively chill session with fewer big ticket, like, oh my God, they're really going to do that kind of bills. But of course, it's the legislature. So it's not like there haven't been interesting fights. I know, Andrea sent me a list of things you guys are particularly interested in. Senate Bill 200 to me is a fascinating one that if people are interested, I can speak on. The climate bill, SB 62, the jail population bill is really interesting. There's a number of interesting policing bills. I think the common theme among those and others is that Democratic majorities matter for sure, but your personnel matters too. And what we are reminded of this session is just because they have 20 Democrats in the Senate and plus 17 margin in the House, it doesn't mean you could do whatever you want. And that to me has been kind of like the underlying thing for people to understand, because I hear a lot of frustration from people like, with Democrats like these, why aren't they doing this? Or maybe there's more conservative folks are relieved to see that they're not doing this or that. And the answer is, it depends on what kind of Democrats you have, and on a lot of things: housing issues, policing, climate, most recently guns. It can be hard to get 33, 18, and 1 on the same page. If it were easy, of course, it wouldn't be such a big deal that the transportation bill's coming out now, because they would have figured this out in their first couple of years. Or we wouldn't be wondering if they're going to pass 200 or 62. So that's kind of a consistent theme for me. I don't know. Other than that, I am pretty much inclined just to take your guys' questions. I hope I can be helpful. There's about 500, 700 bills every year. So There may be things I can't answer, but I'll do my best.
Do we have any questions from our audience for Alex? What he's observed? Go ahead and use the raise hand function, or you could submit it in the chat. See a raised hand from John Taylor. John, go ahead.
I'm doing that to get the ball rolling with this whole group, but one that stands out to me, Alex, is the public option initiative. And wondering if you have any prognosis on where that's headed and what it might ultimately look like in its final form.
I think it's, but by the way, that's another bill that a colleague of mine has primarily handled. But of course, you can't work at the legislature and not hear about that one all the time. It's, I think its final form will probably be pretty close to what it is now. As with transportation, there's so much behind the scenes work that's led to this moment. The difference is with public option, it's been less behind the scenes because they delayed the hearing, and there's been pretty public fights over it. Whereas the transportation press conference they had the other day and their big, jubilant rollout was the product of a lot of Zoom meetings and stuff over the past year. And then they finally rolled the thing out. Public option has been much messier. It's been stop and go. There were points at this session where I was like, yeah, maybe they won't pass this bill, period, however it looks. And maybe that'll still happen, but I doubt it. I think that the fact that they've gotten some in the healthcare field, at least to a point of neutral, represents a significant step. I think the bill will pass. And to what extent it'll change, I'm not exactly sure, but I bet not that much.
Thank you, Alex. If there's one bill that or action from this session that will impact the day-to-day lives of all our workers and folks and small businesses, which one would you say that is that we'll see the soonest or feel the quickest?
Good question. Probably the transportation bill, but I don't know. I don't know about a bill that I say like this hits every Coloradan. I mean, I think the budget is maybe a good answer to that, which is kind of a boring answer and consistently one of the least, sexy topics to our readers. But there was a real crisis as recently as 1 year ago, where state economic analysts were saying, they were advising, and the Joint Budget Committee was acting on, and then the legislature, basically the hacking of the entire state budget. They cut so many programs and services, and I felt at the time Coloradans are going to feel this. They're going to notice this in probably mostly little ways in their lives, but that government office down the street's going to go from 9 to 5 to 9 to 3, or snow plowing on the highway is going to take a little bit longer, or I don't know, their school district's going to have substantially less per pupil funding. People were in tears over these things, and I'll never forget it. And I felt like, oh my God, is this how it's going to be for years? And maybe, I'm sure, everybody wondered that. Thank God we have a vaccine. But the turnaround for in the economic forecast for this state has been miraculous. Probably should be humbling for economists and journalists and anybody else in the prediction making business, because you just never know. And I guess there really wasn't a lot of precedent in this case to draw upon to say, okay, here's how it's going to happen. But the budget, the state revenues, and as a result, the budget, are back to a really healthy place, to the point that I think I don't know, I was going to use the word catastrophic. It might be overstating it, but a substantial, noticeable cut to government services maybe to wages for the 30,000 people who work in the government. You know, that's what was headed Colorado's way, and that crisis has pretty much been averted. So yeah.
All right, thanks, Alex. Looking at the chat, we have a question from Nicole Milo, one of our members, and I will let Nicole ask that question herself. You're on mute, Nicole.
You would think I would get this together at this point in time. Sorry about that. Just had a question for you, Alex, in regards to this set of your thoughts on the set of tax bills that were introduced earlier this week, 1311 and 1312. What are your thoughts on those?
My main thought on those is that if you are interested in progressive fiscal reform, which the sponsors of these bills are, it's hard to make a big impact in Colorado because of Tabor. So this is what they feel they can do. $375 million, which, first of all, it's going to phase in. So that's how much money will be moved around by like 2023, and then on an ongoing basis.
Hey, Alex, can you just maybe mention what those bills are?
Oh yeah, I apologize.
Oh, that's right.
So they are bills to eliminate tax expenditures for wealthy individuals making over $400,000 a year. I believe that, so it's a pair of bills. One of the bills concerns people, the other concerns business. The people bill, I believe, would affect like the top 0.4% of filers. And then there is a bill to eliminate some corporate tax breaks, which these legislators consistently refer to as loopholes. Of course, one person's loopholes, another person's business solvency, and I think that'll be the thrust of the debate in committee and on the floor on that side. But it's a pair of bills that together propose to not raise, because it's existing money, but move around tax breaks, basically from the rich to the poor, in short, or the poorer. So to fund the child tax credit, a boost to the earned income tax credit, so lower income families could expect several $100s more a year because of this. Small businesses would get a break. The net is $375. But as I was saying a second ago, to me, what this really represents is like, if you want to reform the tax code, if you're interested in fiscal policy in Colorado, you have to work on the margins. And 375 million might not sound marginal, but it kind of is in the grand scheme of the need of this economy, particularly given that the stated goal there is to help small businesses and struggling families. I mean, for context, the state of Colorado spent $168 million earlier this year. At this point, maybe it was late last year, at least my sense of time, but in the last, some number of months, to send they spent $168 million to send about 400,000 people $375 once. Okay, so not a life-changing amount, right? No matter who you are, $375 is nice to have, but it's not going to lift you out of poverty. At best, it'll probably help you out that month. The cost of that program, which benefited a fraction of Coloradans, was about half of what this thing's going to raise in the, by 2023. So my take on the bill, on the bills, it's a big deal compared to what we typically see in terms of fiscal policy at the legislature, because they just don't have that much control over it. But it is relatively small potatoes compared to what ballot measures can do. And I kind of, one way that we'll know that the blue wave of this state is really complete is when ballot measures that are born from the same ideology that informs 1311 and 1312, when those start to pass, that's when it'll be a new day. And on ballot measures, of course, you can talk about billions of dollars, and this is 375 million. So anyway, I don't want to say it's not a big deal one way or another. I think it's really interesting. This is certainly as big a deal on the fiscal policy side as I've seen from a bill, maybe since I got to the legislature. But there are limits to the blue wave, depending on your perspective, for better or worse. And that is certainly true in the fiscal context.
Alex, thank you for providing that perspective, for providing us your thoughts. I think a little bit of a different take than what we hear from our elected officials at times. So we appreciate that. And we'll continue to read your coverage in the Denver Post so that we stay up on what's going on there. Thanks for everything you're doing down there at the Capitol.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, Alex. We do have two of our legislators that I see that just joined us. And we've invited them to come through and tell our businesses exactly what they need to know about what you're doing at the Capitol, and also give them the opportunity to ask our businesses anything you need to know about what you need to be doing down at the Capitol. So with that being said, I will first go to our representative, Judy Amabile, who actually represents our district in Boulder, or one of them that represents our district in Boulder, because the other one is here too, and she'll be going right after. Judy?
Hi, it's good to see all of you. Thanks so much for inviting me to join you today. I was listening in there to Alec Burness, and he was giving you a pretty good summary, so I don't want to repeat all the things that he just said. There are two big tax bills that just got introduced, and they'll be in finance later this week. And I'm sure that's something you all will want to be paying a lot of attention to. And I'd be happy to, talk with any of you about your feelings or opinions or concerns with those bills. I'm not on the finance committee, so I have less influence over what happens with those, but they're a big deal. And the transportation bill got introduced, and I know you all are scouring that and trying to figure out where you are landing with that. And again, I'd be happy to talk to you about any concerns that you have. I have not read that bill yet. It's I think it's 130 pages long. So I apologize for that. I've been busy doing other things. And so there's also been a bunch of environmental legislation that's either already made it through or is in the process. And there is Senate Bill 200, which I think you guys have probably heard about. It's to accelerate what we're doing with regard to environment and climate change. And then there's the big plastics bill, which I'm a co-sponsor of. And that's making its way through the process, and a building electrification bill, and a bill that takes a different look at how we calculate the impact of gas. And that some of that stuff is being run by Boulder County's own Representative Burnett, and she's just been terrific. And then of course you can hear from Edie on her energy choice bill, which is also a really big deal and making its way through the process, which I plan to vote yes on. So, but love to talk to you about that too. The things that I've been most working on, well, really these gun bills that came about as a result of the shooting at King Soopers. So the bill that I'm sponsoring, 1298, which is about background checks and adding violent misdemeanors to people who can't pass a background check. You would be limited to purchase a firearm for 5 years if you were convicted of one of these violent misdemeanors. That bill has made it out of the Judiciary Committee, and it's either going to be heard on second readings tomorrow or Friday, and that should be hopefully heading over to the Senate next week sometime. The preemption bill, which Boulder was particularly interested in, is Edie's the sponsor of, and so I'll let her talk about that. And then there's a third bill, which is about setting up this Office of Gun Violence Prevention at the Capitol. And I think that's one of the most meaningful things we'll do with regard to gun violence prevention, just to give an opportunity to really study that and really understand what are the root causes and what can we do to address it, and also to do some public messaging around things like the red flag law that are already in law, but a lot of people don't know about that and they don't know how to use it if they needed it. I also just had a bill signed into law that's about mentoring in our it's providing mentors from the adult prison in the juvenile or the youthful offender corrections facility. And it's a bill that will hopefully help reduce recidivism and reimagine how we are treating people when they're in our prisons. And I'm also working on a bill that would put some guardrails around the use of solitary confinement in our jails. And then I would say the other big and exciting thing that we're doing is we're figuring out how to use the stimulus money or the federal money that's coming into the state. And we have, we're looking at how can we use this money for transformational change. And the 3 buckets for that are education, mental health care, and housing. And of course, there is an intersection there with the mental health and the housing. So that's been a really robust conversation, and we'll probably do some emergency measures in the short run. And then we will have a group that meets throughout the interim session and be ready to pass some really meaningful transformational legislation starting in January, using some of those dollars to really make some big changes. So that's what I got. And I actually do have another meeting in 2 minutes. So, but I'd love a question if anybody has a question.
All right, looking to our group, does anybody have a question for Representative Amabile?
All right.
Not seeing any. Representative Amabile, thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for the legislation that you're trying to push. And as a former small business owner here in Boulder, thank you for representing us the way you do down at the Capitol.
You are welcome. And I am on the business committee, so I am very open to talking to you all about legislation that's going through that committee and what I can do to help you have that be what you're wanting it to be. So thank you.
Thank you. We have another legislator here with us, Representative Edie Hooten, who represents the eastern side of Boulder and is quite active on several committees. Representative Hooten, what do our businesses need to know about everything you've been working on? And if there's anything you would like to know about them or any issues that we have, that would be good to hear.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and thanks to all of you on this call for making some time for Judy and me to let you know what we're working on. Of course, Alex and the news does a great job of covering the big legislative initiatives that are going on at the Capitol, transportation, of course, being the big one right now. But for me personally, just so that you know, I am the chair of the Capital Development Committee. And what we do is make recommendations to the Joint Budget Committee on funding for state-owned property. So that includes all higher education, property, buildings, new construction, maintenance, upgrades. We get every year from the Department of Education their priority list. We're also responsible for reviewing and making recommendations to the Joint Budget Committee for all the other state-owned properties. So all agency-owned property, corrections, parks and wildlife, mental health facilities, et cetera. And that's quite a task. And it's a committee I really enjoy. You learn so much about the way the state functions through the way that we fund public properties. Of course, this is important to Boulder and the Northwest Chamber because CU belongs to that whole list of state-owned property. And what we do is we get a list of priorities from the Department of Education every year, and we get a list of priorities from the OSPB. And then we look at their priorities through our own lens, and we reprioritize them. We like to look for regional balance. We look at the population served by these state buildings and where they're located. You know, community colleges in small areas of the state provide a greater role in their communities than perhaps community college in the metro area. They tend to be a hub. So we take all of that into consideration. And then we reprioritize and we send it to the Joint Budget Committee. And they usually take our recommendations. They sometimes tweak it a little bit. They did this year, but nothing significant. So that is one of the hats I wear. I am the vice chair of the Energy and Environment Committee. And as you all know, energy is trending. It's a very big issue. The PUC spends quite a bit of time on their open dockets on energy related legislation. I have several bills this year that deal with energy. One of them is a study at the PUC of the community choice energy model. It's also known as community choice aggregation in other states. It's exactly the same thing, but I choose to use energy because I think it is more intuitive. It has been highly successful in California and 8 other states. And now you've got Boston, Columbus, Ohio, and the Twin City areas in Minnesota, who are all pursuing their own community choice energy authorities. What it does in a nutshell is it allows communities or groups of communities to come together and procure their own electricity, and then have it delivered by their incumbent utility, who continues to own their infrastructure and do the distribution, the transmission, distribution, the billing, demand side management, customer service. So the only thing that changes is that a community can procure their own energy, and communities served in investor-owned utility territory are really bound by the energy mix that the utilities choose. And more than 1.5 million Coloradans live in communities that have more ambitious renewable energy goals. So this is a possible path forward for them. It also injects the market into accelerating the decarbonization of our electric supply by introducing competition. And nothing would change. This is a study bill with 23 questions for the PUC to consider. And everyone who has a stake in this, consumers, the utilities, environmental organizations, CEOs, board members, community choice aggregation authorities in other states can also weigh in. Labor. Anyway, I think it's going to be an appropriations on Friday, and I'm feeling cautiously optimistic, but you know, the race ain't over until the tape is broken. So we'll see how that bill goes, but that is a bill I've been working on for a couple of years. And I think it is very promising for communities like Boulder. It's often known as Muni Light. We wouldn't have to create a Muni. We could achieve our goals without having to do that if the conclusions of the PUC are favorable. another bill that I'm running. It's called the Pharmacy Benefit Management Transparency Bill. To me, that's a bit of a misnomer. Really what it does is it was a big negotiation between the PBMs and the insurers and providers, healthcare providers and their patients on how to provide real-time benefits for the physicians and their providers. It does multiple other things that are greatly beneficial to patients and providers without too much of a sacrifice on the part of the PBMs and the insurers. So the ultimate goal is to get opposition to neutral, and we're just, I would say, one more amendment away from that. It's been a lot of work since last summer, but I think it will benefit a lot of people, industry as well as patients. As Judy mentioned, well, I'll get to that later. I'm also working on a bill that has to do with towing practices. And in Colorado, we have something called consensual towing and non-consensual. And non-consensual towing has to do with towing in mobile home communities and in communities that are governed by HOAs who contract with towing companies. And they have their own set of rules about what is and is not a towing violation. And these towing companies are on premises 24 hours a day. And can tow for very minor reasons, like being partially parked on a sidewalk if you don't have a driveway long enough to accommodate two cars. It's arbitrary, and it is expensive and arbitrary. And so we're taking a look at that, how we might bring the non-consensual towing to a place that consensual towing operates on. So what I'm doing is changing the makeup of the towing task force, which is housed at the PUC, to include some consumers, because right now it's just all represented by industry. And that would also include the Consumer Protections Bureau, and also providing some specific direction to the task force and an annual report that they would provide then to the PUC and the legislature. And that has its first hearing tomorrow in committee, and it will probably, like lots of legislation, go through many iterations before we have a final bill. But that's an important piece of legislation I'm working on. As far as the state stimulus package.
Representative Hooten, we
Yes.
have a couple questions that are coming in, and
Sure.
I switched to gallery view in the Zoom, which is up in the right-hand corner for anybody that wants to see the whole group. And I know we have a housing question that was just sent to me, wondering if anything is happening, from Rachel Garcia at the Latino Chamber of Boulder County. But also Lori Call has a question. Lori, was it about the towing or one of the bills that Edie asked, or can we go to Rachel for the housing question?
Rachel and I might even have the same question. Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay.
Thanks, Lori. I was wondering if there were any plans to help the minority and low income and other underserved communities to reach financial empowerment, including a path to homeownership.
Yeah. So that's a great question. I don't work directly on housing issues outside of a bill that I am one of the sponsors of, and that's the evictions moratorium bill. And we continue to negotiate with the governor's office on how long the eviction moratorium will be extended. And after the extension has expired, changes we would like to see made around evictions and the statutes that govern evictions going forward. So we are in the process of that. We had quite a bit of state stimulus money in December earmarked for housing. That money is just now being allocated. So, and we last week or 2 weeks ago, our caucus, and I'm sure the Republican caucus did the same thing. We prioritized where we would like to see those housing dollars go. And right now that is being negotiated with those directly involved with housing. And I'm not a part of those conversations, but I think you're going to see something probably within the next 5 to 7 days about the bills that are going to drop around the housing stimulus funding that we've received. As Judy had mentioned, the federal stimulus dollars that we're expecting, within the next 3 months, a big bucket of that will go toward housing, and it will go toward low-income housing. We do have a bill that's making its way through the legislature that allows someone's rent history to be used on a credit report, and to identify a renter who is applying for a mortgage, to have that as part of their credit report, which is really helpful to a lot of low-income families who don't have many means for demonstrating their credit worthiness. So there are a lot of little bills that are helpful in this way. Access to home ownership. I'm sorry, I can't speak directly to what other measures we're considering, except to say the federal dollars will be divided into 3 buckets. Housing will be the largest, and then we've got mental health. I mean, really, we need a $500 billion to deal realistically with the impacts of not addressing mental health in so many sectors of our society, but housing, mental health, and then education. So those are going to be the 3 big buckets. But what I will commit to you, and Lori will follow up with me, is getting to you both a more detailed explanation about specifically what we are doing at the legislature to facilitate homeownership in the minority and low-income communities.
Thank you, Representative Hooton. I think we have time for one last question from Lori. Still has the hand up. Lori, did you have one last question for Representative Hooton?
Thank you, Andrea, and I know we're up against time, and so I'll try to make it quick. Representative Hooton, we're kind of watching House Bill 1271. That is a bill that works with local municipalities to encourage affordable housing. Is that a bill that you've been following and can speak to at all?
No.
Fair enough. Well, keep your eye on it because it's really interesting.
I'm not sure. And if this is something you're following, Lori, where is it in the process? Has it had its first committee hearing yet?
I can follow up with you offline on the process, but it's a bill that encourages affordable housing, and that's something that we as a Northwest Chamber Alliance have really come together on.
Do you know, because I'm on the Transportation and Local Government Committee, so 1271 will come to local government. Well, it should. And I haven't seen it yet, so I'm curious to know where it is in the hearing process and who the bill sponsors are. Do you know who the sponsors are?
Yeah, I can pull it up, and I don't want to. I know we're tight on time.
Well, so follow up with me on access to home ownership and the affordable housing piece of and how 1271 interfaces with local government on that.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And Representative Newton, there is one last question in the chat about rent increase, which is affecting the Latino community. Is there anything being done about rent increase at the legislature this year?
I'm not sure about that. I know
Okay.
every year, this is an ongoing debate between the rights of landlords to increase rent and the impact it has on tenants. And I know, like with mobile home legislation, we were able to put some guardrails around the frequency of raising lot fees. There is the Telluride decision that is a workaround rent control. And I know that there is a bill in the pipeline that would make it easier for communities to, like we already do in Boulder, right? We have cash in lieu. So when we have new housing projects, we required so many units to be affordable. And if that doesn't happen, then the contractor pays cash in lieu. And then that goes to our housing authority, whatever. You guys know a lot more about that than I do. There is a tremendous amount of resistance in the Republican caucus to rent control or anything that suggests that there should be some restrictions on landlords to raise rents. But it is a very serious problem, especially in the time of COVID, especially with the rate of evictions that we're seeing, with which just compounds an ability to be housed, because once you have an eviction on your record, regardless of current resources, it's extremely difficult to become rehoused. So these are serious housing issues, and I apologize that I'm not more on top of the housing bills that you're discussing, and I will be.
That's okay. We
Apologize for
have
that.
another comment in the chat.
Okay.
SB 21173 addresses eviction times and fees to protect renters.
Oh.
So we'll go ahead and follow up with your staff
Do
on
we
that.
know whose bill that is?
Anna asked that in the chat. Anna, do you happen to know by any chance?
I haven't seen that either, so I'm wondering if it's still on the
One
Senate
second to
side.
pull it up.
Anna's pulling it up right now.
So it's probably a Julie Gonzalez bill, I would imagine. She does a lot of housing legislation. And it may still be on the Senate side because I haven't seen it in transportation and local government yet.
Yep, Julie Gonzalez, Dominic Moreno, Caraveo, and Gonzalez Gutierrez.
Yep.
So
They
we'll-
are, along with Steve Woodrow, they are our housing go-to.
Thank you Anna, for
legislators.
bringing that link to the chat, and
Yeah.
go ahead and follow up. Representative Hooten, thank you for being here. Thank you for highlighting your bills, answering our questions, and thank you for representing us and being one of the representatives of this region. So thank you very much.
It's an honor. It's absolutely an honor. And I just thank you for all you do for our little slice of heaven on the Front Range. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Great
Representative
organization
Hooten.
to work with. So we'll be talking to you soon.
All
And
right,
take care. Thanks again for having me.
At this point, I'd like to turn it over to the leaders of the Northwest Chamber Alliance. If you would like to say anything else to our audience before we log off for the day. I think we've had a long day here under the virtual Capitol Dome on Zoom, but we heard from our governor, from state senators, representatives, from those pushing some of the biggest bills we're seeing this session. And thank you all for your comments, your questions. And now I just turn it over to the leaders of the Northwest Chamber Alliance for any last comments they may have.
Andrea, I'll just say a big thank you to you for moderating the conversation today and all the work that you did to coordinate everyone and get everybody on the same page. I thought it was great. Thanks to all those from Longmont that participated and all of my colleagues that joined us today. And I was especially interested in the Northwest Rail conversation and the transportation bill. So that was probably the biggest takeaway that I got today. But thank you, Andrea, very much for all your work.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, I'll echo Scott's comments, Andrea. Thank you very much. And you too, Lori, for all the effort you put into this and the Boulder Chamber for, basically doing all the legwork around this. So thank you, John. Appreciate support on this. And thank you to everyone that was here. I had a couple of board members that were listening in. They didn't ask any questions. But everybody that did ask the questions and all our legislators, thank you for being here.
Sam. Rachel, anything from the Latino Chamber you'd like to say?
Just thank you so much for organizing and having us here today and getting our question in there at the end. We appreciate it.
Scott Beard.
Just echoing the thanks for everyone, and particularly for you guys for pulling this together. You make it easy to learn what we need to know as chamber leaders. Thanks.
Thank you. And John, I think you're the last one left.
Yeah, I mean, I thank the team. I had nothing to do with this, and I'll just say also that I just love working with this team of the Northwest Chamber Alliance. And for those who aren't as familiar with our group, we work incredibly collaboratively toward initiatives on behalf of the entire region. And so this is an example of coming together, but it's really the voice that we have when we take positions on some of these critical issues that is where the rubber meets the road. And we've done a lot of that. And so I look forward to continuing going forward on behalf of our business leaders who are represented here. So thanks team.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to all of you that saw this whole event through. Thank you for coming. And if there's any issues, please don't hesitate to send them to your chamber leaders, to anybody you know at the chambers for us to take those on for you. Thank you, everyone.